Hi everybody, it's me, The Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there's Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Co-host Dr. Sasha Lessin, and today we are going to interview our guests, Frank-Jacob and Tonia-Madenford. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Frank first and then Tonia, and then we're going to talk about their movie, Packing for Mars. Frank-Jacob is an award-winning filmmaker and visual artist. His most recent work is as a writer and director of the recently released feature documentary, Packing for Mars, which won the People's Choice Award at the 2016 EBE Film Festival. He is a music producer and composer and was producer and supervising editor for Series 2 and 3 of the hit Red Bull show Ultimate Rush. Jake was a director and producer of the feature documentary Solar Revolution, which won Best Feature at the 2013 EBE Awards and the award for Best Consciousness Film of 2013 at the New Realities and Meta Center Spiritual Film Festival in New York City. Known for his enigmatic approaches, Jacob has visually realized many different subjects that would not ordinarily find their way into the audiovisual medium. This has included an audiovisual exploration of blindness called Beating Darkness for Austrian vision researcher Michaela Velikay-Parel, an afterlife video Epitaph depicting the work of deceased architect Herwig Illmaier, and an annual report in form of audiovisual narrative entitled Information is Art, which he performed live in 2007 with cellist Katharina Feldbacher at Carnegie Hall for the influential American-Austrian Foundation. So that's a little bit about Frank, and he's got a longer bio on aquarianradio.com, and a little bit about Tonia-Madenford. And she's the driving force behind the cutting-edge motion picture company Screen Addiction, LLC. She has produced films at varying budget levels and divides her time between working on major Hollywood studio pictures and independent features. Tonia has collaborated with many celebrities over the years on productions that have been distributed by MTV, National Geographic, National Lampoon, Lionsgate, Sony Pictures, ArcLight Films, Columbia Pictures, Pay-Per-View, PBS, Amazon, Sunset. Boy, she's busy, and on and on. And she has won numerous awards, both nationally and internationally, for her endeavors. So she is a documentary producer, and her releases include UFO, The Greatest Story Ever Told, UFO, The Greatest Story Ever Denied, 2, Moon Rising, The Klaus Chronicles, Secret World 1, Celestial, and Solar Revolution, and so on and so forth. So more about Tonia and Frank on aquarianradio.com. Dr. Lessin, Sasha, would you like to say something?
Really glad to have Frank and Tonia back. Looking forward to the show.
Okay. Aloha, Frank, Tonia.
Aloha.
Where do you hail from right now? You travel all over the place. Where are you beaming into us right now?
We're actually calling in from Bavaria, so it's 2 in the morning for us. So we're up bright and early, and we're so happy to join you.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Well, welcome, and thank you for staying up all night for us, or getting up early. I'm not sure what it is.
But it's a pleasure to be back on again with you. Wonderful to connect with you. I guess it's evening, or what is it, afternoon? Where are you actually physically located right now?
Well, we are on the opposite side of the planet. It's 2:00 p.m.
Maui, Hawaii.
in Maui, Hawaii. So we're exactly halfway across the world.
Is it cold in Bavaria?
No, it's
still summer.
It's still summer, sort of summerish. It's been nice.
We're
very nice.
We haven't seen much of the weather lately, though, because as seemingly always, we're buried deep in post-production on yet another project.
Do tell.
Yeah, what's your current project?
What are you doing?
Well, we are actually very happy to be releasing Packing for Mars as a fully dubbed German version.
Which should be out in 1 week. Dieter Burrows has a congress in Vienna. He's flying in all of the special guests and star speakers from Solar Revolution. We're attending as guest of honors, and we're going to do the official Packing for Mars German release live at the event. So that will be quite exciting indeed.
Wow, that's amazing. So are you going to do versions of Packing for Mars in other languages?
Well, for now, we don't have any other foreseeable languages. There's been, a few requests, perhaps in French. We're not sure, but for me, it was obvious to do it in German since I'm able to speak German, and I wanted to make sure if I could do a German version that I would be able to narrate it just like I do in the English version. So I was in the studio a couple of weeks ago polishing up on my German pronunciation, which is no easy feat by any means.
No easy feat. So you were raised in Germany, or you were born there? Or what? I forget your story. What's your German connection?
I was born in Canada, and I have German lineage. So my family's origins come from Germany, and my parents were German immigrants to Canada. But I'm one of the new kids on the block, sort of North Americans. But I went back to Germany many years later because by birthright, the way the law in Canada worked was that I was able to get a citizenship for Germany. And at a certain point, I decided, well, it might be cool to go over to Europe and explore those routes. And it's been 10 years.
Wow. That's fascinating.
But I've had to struggle with the language.
It wasn't one that you were raised in, I guess. You didn't. Did your parents speak German in your household when you were growing up?
We had kind of a deal where my parents wanted to learn English, so they made us speak English to them, and they wanted us to learn German, so they spoke German to us. So it was kind of like, hear it in German, speak it in English, kind of a strange thing. I think you can only do that if you start very early in life. But so I heard it and I understood it, but speaking it is another thing altogether. There's some serious tongue twisters in German, and the words are humongous, sentence-sized words,
Yeah, that was fun trying to dub the film because German it takes a lot longer and more sophisticated language to describe things. So the mastering and mixing has been quite intriguing to fit all the voices and make it all work and time it all and get the pacing perfect and master it. Like particularly for me, which I don't speak any German, it's been an interesting experience in the studio.
Yes, I was wondering how that worked for you, Tanya. You don't speak German, and so you're working on a German film, and that must have been quite a feat for you to do that.
It's actually been really good. We've been sort of playing a bit of good cop, bad cop, so I can look at it with neutral eyes and just look at the mixing levels and the timing of it all and how it feels. I'm a very intuitive when it comes to the feeling and the pacing of a film. So that's been good. And he can focus more than on the structure, the sentence structure and the wording and the grammatics. Yeah, so
she really is amazing. I tell you, Janet. I mean, she, even though she speaks she doesn't speak the language. She popped in a couple of times during the mix, and she found like the two spots where there was actually some German missing. I don't know how she said, don't ask me how. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, isn't there something missing there? How come there's a pause? And I'm like, yeah, there's actually a huge sentence missing right there. What did we do? We missed that one.
One of the chunks missing was the entire punchline to the movie, which, so it's interesting. It's been a very good, like, happy medium balance. It's an intuition thing. And you just feel it, I think, and also this is another thing with dub films. When you dub, you lay that voice track, or there's multiple voice tracks, because we have 16 presenters in the film. So you're laying these voice tracks over the top. And you've got to balance all these different voices, and you have to bring it all together. But you also want to keep that very cinematic sort of road. This is a road film, so we want to keep it really real. And if you go to a studio here and you're doing a lot of dub voices, it can get quite, I don't know what the word is, clinical. It gets a little bit corporate style. So we wanted to really make and keep things real, very organic. This is a very wild ride down the rabbit hole with, all kinds of subjects like teleportation and time travel and breakaway civilizations. And so to have all these different actors come in and speak the parts and then weave it together and yet keep it very natural and real was a very fun experience.
Yeah, and it's also an interesting idea. I was telling the person who helped us in the studio put it together, I was saying, they do a lot of overdubs and commercial work, and I'm thinking to myself, how do they feel like dubbing the dialogue about, Andy Bishago's jump room experiences in time, and this is science fiction. This is actually a documentary. So I was wondering a lot of times what might be going on in their heads, reading the lines and speaking those lines.
Wow.
But they're all.
What did they say?
Oh, it went great.
Yeah, did you?
Wonderful job. They really did an amazing job. I must say, the German version is
fantastic.
The German fans love it.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So it hasn't premiered till tomorrow. You're saying tomorrow it's going to premiere in Germany?
The background.
We're going to be working on it the next 2 days. We owe it to Sony on Tuesday, and then we're hoping to have it all ready by September 15th, and we'll be launching it at it's called the Chaos and Order Congress on September 15th in Vienna, Austria.
Isn't it 16th?
Oh, amazing.
17th and 18th, yeah.
So do they have to make their talk coincide with when the lips of a speaker is speaking?
It's not quite like it is with like 100% dub where you have a Hollywood film, for example. They'll dub it in another language and you won't hear the original language. With a documentary, because you want people to feel assured that they can understand that somebody in the background is saying the things that they're actually hearing. You can hear a little bit of the original speaker, and then the dub voice will come in and overpower, of course, the voice of the original speaker.
Oh,
so
I got it. Like NPR does that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a fine line. I mean, you just want to know you're hearing, the person. It's like, I think with documentaries, you can't completely 100% dub. Although sometimes I got to say, we're watching them on the screen, and it actually does look like they're saying it. So that's the cool thing about this version.
Wow, thanks.
Wow, that's amazing. So we need to back up and tell our listeners a little bit more about the film, but I just had a couple more things about this, the dubbing process. So you are going to have some people in your audience that know both languages, so they'll know when you screw up, if you screw up on the on the dubbing, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to be careful.
Absolutely. Yeah, we spent we did 3 passes on the translation because it just the language over here is so specific and grammatically complex that if you're making a film like Packing for Mars and you're dubbing it in there's the kind of dubbing, there's the kind of translation where it's a conversational translation, kind of like the way people write in texts and emails. It's not really as formal. But if you were to do a film like Packing for Mars with that approach, it would take away the credibility of the film because the people watching it in Germany would think, okay, it's kind of a sloppy slang language, so it can't really be that serious. So we really worked hard to make the translation impeccable. and it's super high level German. So we're not worried about that. I'm worried about more the pronunciation. When I'm doing the narration, of course, I have to make sure that it says what I actually wrote originally in English, but at the same time, I'm having to struggle to pronounce it correctly.
It's also really good, like Frank said, to still also feel and hear the original speakers, because the kinds of information that they're bringing forward, you really want to sense who they are, how they are energetically, what they feel like, if you can trust them. We have a lot of close angles when we shoot in the film as well, so we're getting right into the eyes of the people. So it was also a dance to make sure we had people that really matched and fit that character, and that they spoke in the same intensity and frequency and pacing and timing of those original people because of the kinds of material coming forward. We were very fortunate because our last feature documentary, which was really successful even here in Europe, Solar Revolution, we dubbed that in German and French. And so we're using the same wonderful Music More studio that we used on Solar Revolution. Those producers have been fantastic. They were fantastic on Solar Revolution. In fact, there were many people that said even the German version was better than the English version. Because German is just a very complex language. It has a great way of describing and reiterating complex subjects with lots of detail.
Well, the English language has a lot of German in it, correct?
The grammar is that way, but half the words are from the Norman invasion too, in English.
Well, yes,
So,
a lot of
Frank,
German. All right, I'll just finish up that last bit. German words are three or more English words sandwiched together to make one big, long German word. Pronounced, of course, German.
They'll take all the sentence and run it all together as one word.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Frank, do you have a Canadian accent to the German people? Even though you're doing this, you still have a foreign accent since you're
Yes,
German?
Boot or about.
I believe I have. I think I've ditched the English accent from living in the United States for many years, but I definitely have a foreign accent. I believe in the German, but it's there. It's subtle. I mean, the producers working with us really pushed me to enunciate correctly and to because the first few passes they were looking at me going, I don't know if you can do this, dude. And I'm like, yes, I can do this, right? So I really worked hard to pronounce correctly. And, on top of it, you have to speak, because there's twice as many words in the same amount of space, you have to speak twice as fast. So that was the extra challenge on top of it all. So I'm curious to see if you ever hear a soundbite, what you think of it in the future.
Oh, yeah, we'd love to.
But it was
So
really
tell us what's in Yeah, go ahead, Tonya.
No, I was just going to say it was really important to dub this film because there's so much narration in it, and it's very visual. So we needed people to stay in that visual element and to be taken on this journey rather than reading. Subtitles, we always said when we released the film, we would never do other languages because the idea of subtitling it was just, you'd be sitting there reading a long dissertation on screen and you would miss everything happening. And so when we were able to actually bring this full forward as a dubbing opportunity, that was okay. Now we
actually tried the subtitle thing with German, and then I realized after minute 14 that I was just reading the text the entire 14 minutes, so I wasn't even watching the pictures. So that was like, okay, that's not going to work.
Right, this is so visual. You need to be able to see the pictures because the pictures tell 1,000 words. So you
absolutely
could not do that way. Yes.
There's a powerful visual element to the film, which is, a parallel language to just the information coming out of the protagonists.
Mm-hmm.
So tell our audience what Packing for Mars is about. What would you like them to know about it?
Well, Packing for Mars is, like the title says, like one man's journey for truth is the log line, and it's the idea came out of a cult sci-fi 70s science fiction novel called Alternative 3, which somebody handed to me many years ago, sort of a progressive, holistic farmer in Ontario in Canada, and he pulls it out and he said, yeah, this is like science fiction, but it's a true story. It's just the truth masked as fiction. And it was written in a very documentary style, and I was fascinated by the book. And there was also a preceding version of Alternative 3 on British television that came out in 1977, and it was supposed to be released on April Fool's Day as kind of a joke. And the producers of that show had been doing a science report show in England for beforehand. So the people, their audience that were watching, were actually accustomed to seeing factual reporting rather than sci-fi. And they did it in such a clear documentary style, the only difference being that they hired actors and wrote a screenplay that the people that watched it on British television flipped out, and it was kind of a mini War of the Worlds for London, or for England. So there was tens of thousands of people who called the television station after the airing of the original broadcast, just totally flipping out about what was going on and how could this be happening. And the writers of that story on television decided to create it because they wanted to mock people. It was a mockumentary to say people will believe anything they see on television. And they did such a... Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, the whole story behind it. And then Leslie Watkins, he was a writer, he was a Fleet Street reporter, serious journalist who'd written some other serious novels. His publisher approached him and said, "Hey, how'd you like to do a book version of this show?" And it turns out that Leslie, who rarely watched television, actually caught that show and had seen it, and himself was always wondering about a lot of the stuff about the space program, and some things just didn't add up. So he took on this assignment. He said, "Yes, definitely, I'm gonna write this." And he wrote it, and the book became far more in depth than the television program ever did. And it made waves around the world. Major scientific researchers and investigative journalists like Mae Brussel in America, who's kind of a legendary journalist there, were calling it the most dangerous book on their shelf. So people basically thought also, again, just like the television program, that this was reality. And Leslie Watkins, however, insisted, and to this day, that it was completely invented. The whole story, everything was invented. But he was blown away himself that he was getting calls from politicians in England, from people in the inside that were like whistleblowers saying, "How did you get this out there? It's amazing. The truth is finally coming out." And he was like, no, this is all just invented. So finally he had to admit that he seemed to have stumbled upon something which was actually really going on. And this, of course, was the background to the book, and I read it and thought, wow, that's pretty crazy, but I never thought I was going to make a film about it. And it wasn't until many years later that I was kind of looking for a story to sink my teeth in to make a film, a long version feature documentary film. And I stumbled on, I guess I'd been watching some interesting disclosure conference tapes, videos that were done in Barcelona in 2009. And I'd never really knew much about exopolitics, and being, however, a believer kind of in this alternative stuff, I got really interested again. And then shortly after, I heard an interview with Laura Eisenhower and Andrew Basiago talking about their experiences relative to a Mars colony. And then it all came back, and I'm like, wow, so is this really true? So I decided at that point I was going to just grab a camera and a backpack, hit the road, and hunt the story, because I wanted to know for myself if this really was based on truth. What was out there? Let's go and find out. So that's kind of the background to how the story got started.
That's great. So you're back. So how did you get the money to do all that? Did you have to quit work? Did you say to your boss? I mean, what did you tell your boss?
Well, I went and robbed the bank at the corner, and then I jumped that plane really quickly before they could catch me.
There you go.
No, it was really done indie style. It's kind of funny. I was scheduled to be on an overseas expedition. I was leaving the country. I'd already alerted all of my colleagues and friends that I was going to be out of pocket for about the next 3 years. I was doing a lot of research abroad at specific ancient locations, and I was going on what you would call, I guess, a walkabout. And I literally met Frank on the road, his second interview into this film, and after his 4 days of shooting. I was actually hiding at the time, truth be told. I had dropped down at this specific location to spend time with an individual before I left the country. And it just all sort of aligned itself for me to meet Frank, see the daily rushes before we knew it. He was asking me to join him on the road. I knew many of the participants he wanted to get access to for the film, and had actually been aligned and had worked with several of them. So that's what started the role between Frank and I. And it's interesting, even like what he shared with Leslie Walken's book Alternative 3. Everything happens in synchronicity, and everything with this film has been synchronistic. It was 5 years in the making. I literally aborted my entire journey to jump on the journey on this. It was an incredible adventure. We were like Mulder and Scully, looking for all these time travel locations. It was also doing all the interviews, but it was going to these places where these experiments had happened. And, so everything had changed with my plans specifically, but even from a synchronistic standpoint with Alternative 3, 40 years later, when Frank started this with Alternative 3, we didn't know anything about Leslie. I got an actual email from Graham Watkins, Leslie's son, that Graham was re-releasing with Leslie the all-new Alternative 3 book. This is 40 years after its publication, and their launch date is December 15th, 2016. This is, or 2015. This was 2 weeks after the launch of our film, and they didn't know about our film. We didn't even know Leslie was still around. He had all of these things happen after he released his first book. He had death threats. Some of his stuff got confiscated. He was approached, as Frank had said, by all of these external sources, saying that he had tapped into something. And there was all this weird, mysterious activity that surrounded the anomaly of this book. 40 years later, he and Graham were launching this book to the public. And so we got involved, we collaborated, we were thrilled to discover the new news. And now we've created sort of a symbiosis collaboration, and then this has just been like a mutual launch. Within 2 weeks, here the all-new released Alternative 3 comes out, and then Packing for Mars comes out. And so this was really a telltale for us. And for me, having joined Frank on this journey.
So how are you guys getting along? You've been together how long, and you are working on a lot of projects together?
And some couples say that they break up every time they make something, and then they make up after it's over.
We've had a really great business relation. I think it's been a very good creative and a very good team endeavor. We've done, I'm trying to think right now, we've done 6 feature films and 30 television shows in 5 years. And so we've been really busy. I think the whole organic nature of the way we work together.
I mean, we have basically, the two of us are kind of complementary skill sets. We overlap in certain places, and we definitely come from completely different perspectives in other ways. So it really is it's an interesting process whenever we work on a project together, because it can be the end result is always something which far exceeds what either one of us could have done individually, and it's really
synergy.
Nice. Yeah, and it's really nice to have, the yin yang of a production, and it's important, I think, in terms of art, that you try to achieve a balance. And there's so many things in the world which are very masculine and patriarchally oriented, that I think one of the things we could say that characterizes the work that we've managed to do together in the last 5 years is that really does have this masculine-feminine balance in it, which I'm really proud of, that we were able to do that. And it isn't always easy, because, of course, when both people have strong ideas about what they would like to have, and then you have clashing, but you work it out.
Yeah, you have to work it out. We work together on many things. We're not doing movies, but we write books and things, and so you have to learn to go back and forth and give and take and work through where you don't see this in the same places, and then you come back into the vision, continuing with the vision. So I always admire these power couples that achieve great things. So you've made, say that again, how many movies and how many television shows? And you want to tell us a little bit more about those projects, and then we'll go back to Packing for Mars.
Well, I think we've done like 5 or 6. What is it now? Six films at least, and we've done about 30 episodes of Ultimate Rush, which was a Red Bull show, which I think you talked about in the bio. So yeah, a lot of stuff, and we've and including traveling to conferences and things and presenting things internationally.
We were very fortunate when I started on the road with Packing for Mars. Frank was here, based in Europe. I was in the States. We did a lot of the shooting for Packing for Mars, and we shot half of the interviews in Europe, half of the interviews in America. And at that time, Klaus Donner was based in Vienna, and so was Dieter Burrs, who's a best-selling author here in Germany, in the Austria area, the German-speaking countries. And so Klaus, he's amazing. He's an adept artifacts researcher. He goes out and does a lot of research at ancient locations. It's, of course, one of our loves. And he didn't have anything. He didn't have a book. He didn't have a DVD. So Frank had taken a lot of the footage that he had compiled over a 10-year process, and we decided to package it similar to what Zachariah Sitchin did with the Earth Chronicles into what we call the Klaus Donner Chronicles. And we put together the first of a series. We're going to be doing more with Klaus. In fact, we just talked to Klaus 2 days ago, who's on an expedition right now in Asia. And we are now moving forward with more of this information, which is really great because it's really rewriting history. And so that was one of our first things we started working on together after we jumped on this road trip of Packing for Mars. And then Dieter had approached us, and we literally had to shelve after we had released
Go ahead.
One way that history will be rewritten with Klaus Donner Chronicles.
Yes.
Well, one way. And let's just say, in terms of what Klaus, the subject matter of Klaus and the Klaus Donner Chronicles that we've been working with on him, it's actually rewriting history in terms of establishing ancient civilizations with real hard evidence that if any of this stuff is basically analyzed, it becomes apparent that these existing civilizations were here, and that it would rewrite history completely.
What I love about Klaus is he's a matter-of-fact kind of adept researcher. Although he listens to all the theories, he's not so much a theorist. He's into the facts, the carbon dating. He reminds me a little bit of like Michael Cremo. And so when he brings forth these artifacts, I don't know what it is. Well, I do know part of what it is. Klaus was the curator for the Habsburg estate, which is sort of like royalty here in Austria. And so you could liken him in the United States as like a Smithsonian curator. And because he had this high-profile position with you could say, the political structure, there are many artifacts researchers or artifacts, let's say, keepers, people that actually have ancient artifacts, have artifacts in their safekeeping, museum owners, and these kinds of gatekeepers from around the world. Because he has this stature and because he has this sort of curator background, high-profile curator background, he was able to acquire all of these artifacts, many of these artifacts from around the world. And in 2001, he did what was called the Mysteries Unsolved exhibit in Vienna. It went huge. I mean, it was like a traveling sort of exhibit. So he brought in all these artifacts. He procured all these artifacts from around the world, like highly sensitive.
400.
And put together a whole museum catalog. And we're talking highly sensitive, remote, difficult to get your hands on artifacts that in some ways have never been seen in the world. He got the genetic disc. He had the golden airplanes, that you see in Colombia. All of these things that crystal skulls, of course, that many of us have been fortunate to come in contact with. But he gets access to things that most people can't. And he can put them on display because these artifacts holders trust him. And so, and he's involved in his own research and expeditions and archaeological digs. So that's what made this unique. And so when we're talking about rewriting history.
So what I hear so far is that he has documented the artifacts that show the alien presence on Earth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really his main focus. He's reluctant to call it aliens or UFOs or whatever. He just documents it, and it seems to be clear from looking at it that the only kind of conclusion, let's call it, you could draw from the material
explanation
is, all things considered, is that it seems to be that there's an extraterrestrial or off-planet or whatever you want to call it, civilization that had roots here that can be traced back tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years.
There is a artifact on the cover. We used it on the cover art of Klaus Dana Chronicles. It is an artifact, which is really amazing, that was found down in Ecuador. It's a pyramid, and it looks like the pyramid with the all-seeing eye. It's identical to what you see on the dollar bill, only the artifact came first.
Yeah, it's 13,000 years old.
Yeah, and on the bottom side of this artifact, this pyramid, is a gold inlay of the star constellation of Orion. And there's Sanskrit, ancient star Sanskrit, written on the bottom of this pyramid, and they've deciphered it, and it says, "The Son of the Creator comes." Now, Klaus is just an archaeologist, type of approach to this, a factual, what's the carbon dating, how old is it? But if you look at this, a gold inlay of the star constellation Orion with a transcript of ancient star language says, "The Son of the Creator comes." Where is the sun from? And then the all-seeing eye in the upper part literally glows underneath a black light. Now, if this truly is, like Frank just said, 13,000 years old, how did they know that this stone inlay would glow? Could they see into the ultraviolet spectrum? Did they have a different atmosphere? Why did they know, or how did they have black lights 13,000 years ago? So
it really is amazing when you put it under black light what happens to these sculptures.
And so the question is, a lot of people are like, "Oh, Cassandra, and the filmmakers, they're all Illuminati." No. This artifact came first. It's like with everything, the symbols came first, the artifacts came first, then the representation came later. So the dollar bill was something that was predicated later, perhaps mirroring these artifacts. Now, where they found this artifact, not to get into a long thing about this, but where this article find this artifact in Ecuador, there was one of the first cases of natural colloidal silver and colloidal gold that was happening in nature. Colloidal gold. In fact, when they did the research and they tested the water, at first the scientific lab here in Europe, they didn't even think that colloidal gold in a natural state existed. It was, so there's a lot of things that have come forward, not to mention the high Bovie levels and how, organically the fruits and the nature grows in this specific area.
This water she's talking about is so incredible. Just on a side note, Klaus has his own story of being arrested when he crossed over the border, because when his baggage was being put through the security check, the X-ray machine literally malfunctioned when this water went through.
Oh, wow!
They thought he was bringing. They didn't know what he was bringing over.
They were holding him at gunpoint.
But they held him and they said, "Could you come here? Is this your bag?" And he's like, in his mind, he's going, "Okay, someone's drugs on me." And he's in Colombia at this point. And then, so he goes into this room. They say, "What's in it?" And he says, "Well, just water." And they're like, "Really, just water?" And then they walked away, and they could see them talking to some guy with a white, science lab coat on, and they're in these heavy discussions. And then they held him for a couple of hours, and just minutes before he would have missed his plane, they released him. and it's hilarious. You
So
know?
he gets into Europe, right? And the same thing happens. They released him at the final hour in Colombia, and he was actually able to board his plane. So he gets into Europe,
thinking he's safe being back home.
Safe, he's back home, right? And the same thing happens to him at the border. He's all confronted, you know, the immigration comes in. You could liken it to like the TSA with the machine guns pulling him aside in the room again. What did you bring into the country? And he actually this time, you know, played along, and one of the guys actually recognized him and said, "Oh my God, are you Klaus Donna from the Unsolved Mysteries exhibit? My wife and I were there last year," or whatever, whenever that was, because that was back in 2001. And the guy recognized him, and he's like, yeah, that was me. And he goes, "Well, what are you carrying? Because they're seeing something." He goes, "Oh, I just have a couple like bones from some giants." And he was making joke, and the guy was like, "Oh, no, but serious, like what's in this box?" And he goes, that's water. It's nothing but water." And he goes, "Well, do you know?" And he goes, "The same thing happened to me in Colombia. What's going on?" And the guy goes, "So you don't know what's happening?" I said, "No, you know, I almost got held and I almost didn't make my flight." So he brought him over to the scanning machine, and they ran the box through so Klaus could see the monitor plot. And what happened was this water, as it went through the monitor,
You couldn't see it.
It disappeared. The entire
my goodness!
Phased out the entire box, everything inside and around it.
Everything inside it, around it, and in it phased out, and this entire thing disappeared.
It's teleportation gel that they use in Stargate.
What was that?
It's a teleportation fluid that they use in Stargate.
Well, you know, it's also very interesting that Enki, the chief scientist for the Nibiruan gold mining expedition to Earth 6,000 years ago, dictated to his scribe Dubskar that I took samples of the waters in the Persian Gulf, and I found colloidal gold suspended in the waters of the Persian Gulf, and I traced these flecks of gold down to the east coast of Africa, and that's where they founded the gold mines and made the mine slaves.
There you go. So it shows that colloidal silver exists on this planet, and this water from this region, which is literally like, it's a little bit like the Fountain of Youth. You know,
it's amazing.
It's amazing. You could pick a lemon off the tree in this area where these artifacts were found, and it wiggles in your hand. They actually put fence posts in the ground. You know, they cut the tree down, they sanded the tree, they painted them white, they stick them in the ground, and they'll start to grow branches and leaves. It's really amazing. There's so much high level of life force energy, and it's also attributed to these colloidal natural states.
Well, anyway, another thing is, is the artifacts. I guess, you know, the thing is that now there's an emergence. Like Klaus began to receive artifacts from an area in Mexico, and there's been a lot more of these emerging, and these artifacts are just are stunning, and we've included them in Packing for Mars because, you know, we have Jerry Wills in the film talking about an ancient civilization, and these artifacts coming from this region really Huelos de Lisco seem to coincide with that civilization, because depicted on these artifacts are clearly visible, you know, saucer-like aircraft with pilots wearing helmets, and there's no like guessing here. It's not like, oh, that could look like it's an astronaut, you know, if you use your imagination. No, these are depictions of beings wearing spacesuits that have unusual looking physical features. There's not just a couple dozen or several of them that were found. There's thousands of them. So there seems to have been a massive civilization based in this area, which has gone, and then recently there's been some carbon dating done on the artifacts that seem to date them to somewhere between, I think, 3,800 and 5,000 years BC. So these things are solidly authenticated depictions of a historical chapter that will, again, like going back to your earlier question, definitely change history once they are released and acknowledged publicly. I mean, the thing is, the mainstream in archaeology is very, very reluctant to come on board with any of these things because it's so much trouble for them to have to rewrite all of their history books, to have to rewrite all of the science books. And I think that's the big thing that you have as as anybody who's, whether you're an author, a researcher, or filmmakers like us, you have this resistance from the mainstream toward the ideas that you're depicting in your work, because it is actually causing a problem for those who have written history and for a whole foundation of society, which is basing a historical view of science and archaeology on something which is actually obsolete.
Go ahead, Dr.
It's very interesting in the Sumerian texts. They say that when Prince Marduk was closing in on the spaceport on Sinai, Enlil, Yahweh sent his son Ninurta and Ningishita, who built Stonehenge, and others, to South America to make an alternate spaceport, Tiwanaku, with a takeoff at Nazca, and Thoth, Ningishita, actually brought Black Africans and Sumerians to the Mayan areas and to Teotihuacan in the central Mexico. I might also add that the Anunnaki regularly, to this day, those among us still have colloidal silver, platinum, and gold, and eat it every day.
And I just wanted to add that the pyramid artifact that Klaus had found and featured in his exhibition is an indicator of the Zechariah Sitchin story, which said that there was a global community, but what happened was Ningishita and his son Thoth, we also know him in Egypt, his Egyptian name, was relocated to South America because he and his brother Marduk had a fight over Egypt. So Enki, in order to break up the fight, said, Ningishita, you go to South America, and so it's one culture, and of course it goes way beyond.
Absolutely. And the Mayans were space farers too. We know, like from the Guatemalan pilot and others, and Lord Palenque, that they have gone into space, and several people, Corey Good and Kramer and others, have said the Mayans have a skyfaring civilization. They've actually been rescuing people from the Draco slave colonies and rehabilitating them for the time when we throw the Dracos off of our planet too.
Okay. We also talk about Marduk impacting from Mars, because this is absolutely connected with the god Mars and what's happening here on the planet. And we do a whole sequence in the film when we have J.J. Hurtak talking about the astroarchaeology aspect. We do discuss Marduk.
Absolutely. And there's even a cameo appearance by the Archons.
That's right. At the end. Don't go here. Don't go again.
By the way, in appearance by George Norrie, and here in Germany is played by Dieter Burrows. So we have two universal truths in both Germany and the U.S. or English-speaking world. So it's fantastic. Two great minds and great voices.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's clear indications that this global civilization did thrive and was very prevalent all over the planet many years ago, and it can be traced. And the way we explored it in Packing for Mars was to try and find the connection between Mars and Earth. And Dr. J.J. Hurtak, as Tanya was saying, is somebody who's definitely studied a lot of these relations, this connection, the lining up of pyramids, the pointing at certain places in Cairo, for example. The whole foundation of Cairo is lined up with certain specific locations on planet Mars. And even Cairo itself, if you translate the word, translates to Mars. So there's a very distinct, repetitive theme in culture that links our two planets together, including 369 of the English language, which are derived from some form or other of Mars, of the word Mars, or of depicting Mars civilization.
In the Sumerian text, when the head of the EGG, the Mars base astronauts, invaded Earth, and Ninurta killed him in an aerial battle, they sent Prince Marduk to take charge. They brought him back with the body of the leader Anzu to hang him in the middle, and Marduk was made, head of Mars Corps. And,
yes.
So he was the big ship there until the flood, the passing, it's called perigee, of Nibiru that caused Noah's flood, which also ruined Mars base for a time. It was revived later.
It would be very interesting to correlate Klaus's artifacts with the Zechariah Sitchin story and perhaps J.J. Hertog, all the different researchers correlating this information, because I think we'll get a greater picture if we start. I understand Klaus doesn't want to. A lot of people don't want to go into the UFO aspect, but when you overlook that, you don't get the whole picture. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents. It'd be great to correlate.
Well, he goes into it just privately. We must defend Klaus, because when we're in private space with him in a private sphere, we do have long conversations on the subject. But I think with regards to the scientific world and the evidential world, he tries to stick with the factual content of the artifacts themselves and brings them forward. And of course, his interest is those that actually do rewrite history and has this sort of unusual and ancient and, let's just say, extraterrestrial nature within them. I just think he tries to keep everything from a scientific standpoint so that when we're indeed rewriting history, that we can accept that history.
Well, yeah, and things is people really are reluctant to go down that road. Many researchers are, at least, because they're afraid of being pigeonholed with, the woo-woo crowd, the so-called,
theories,
like the worshippers, the believers, and all this wacky stuff. So without foundation, there's many people who accept things at face value. There's many people now that use intuition, but things like these are not really generally accepted in the scientific community as being evidence. So
you're so right.
I commend Klaus, for his ability to just present the data and follow the natural conclusions that if you present this material, and it's you remove all the explanations, what remains is the clear evidence of an extraterrestrial or ancient civilization. Then so be it. You don't need to be a believer. You don't need to intuit it. It's just clear. And I think
you're so right. Yeah, you definitely are.
Mm-hmm, there's a need for people like Klaus to be out there as well, who are who are holding to this sort of a more of a hard line perspective. And so we in our films we try to. We're probably one of those vehicles to bridge together some of these people. I mean, there's people in our film that range all the way from Andrew Bouchago to J.J. Hertog, and those people probably wouldn't be found necessarily in the same room at a party, but in our films, we can make them all look like they're part of the same crew.
And we have an unbiased approach.
Yeah.
Our approach is to literally give a voice to all of these amazing stories and amazing presenters, and yet we don't come to any conclusions. The conclusion is for those of the audience. Our job is to actually ask the questions and get people to be asking questions. And as Frank said, we have such a diverse group of people come to the table, whether it's a Jose Escamilla and then a Jerry Wills and then, an Andy Bouchago and then a Richard Dolan. So we have all of these different facets of storyline and backgrounns and areas and subjects, all feeding into the same ideas and the same knowledge and the same truths that are sort of unraveling.
They're just pulling it out of different. They're just pulling it out of different experiential levels. Some people are experiencers, some people are unwitting participants in DARPA projects, let's say, and other people are bona fide researchers that are, and they're all of them have their own particular language and their own crowd. But we've kind of always seen it as our role to remove the need for them to have to collaborate, but we see it as all evidence on from different perspectives. So looking at Packing for Mars, when I first started on this trip, I didn't really want to limit my perception of what I was going to encounter. I just wanted to go out there and document it for the record. It's just kind of like putting it on the record, because I think if we look at this back, it'll be interesting to look back in 100 years on the archives of materials and media that was being produced by the researchers and artists of the time to see how all of it pans out. And I think if we don't document it, we're never going to explore it to the fullest extent possible.
Sasha,
I would just like to say, as a professional anthropologist who does indeed use science, the ideology of slow, incremental Darwinian evolution, which underlies who gets promoted in academic circles and who doesn't get dumped on by DARPA and its agents, that's come to be a religion or an ideology. But if you actually look at the science, there are no missing links for 140 years of looking, because we didn't evolve out of simpler creatures. We were placed here by interventionists, and so were our predecessors at many, many different times of settlement of the earth. And I think that you'll find that the people that are into orthodoxy are not really into science, where you can generate hypotheses and test what it would take to prove them or disprove them. That's my opinion.
Yeah, sure. No, but I mean, even as a scientist, you have to have kind of a premise from which to explore and experiment and base your experiments on. And some of those premises, and we all know many of the thousands of experiments scientists do amount to nothing. They were just a crazy hypothesis, and they tried it and it didn't work out. But some of them do work out. And as we're now seeing with the development of quantum computers, and that the idea.
Sorry to interrupt you, but we're on our top of the hour, a commercial break, and you are listening to The Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio. We'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
And I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men, and free men you are. What will you do with that freedom? Will you fight? We will run, and we will live. Aye. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
The future is uncertain. I know this. Death is inevitable. I know this. But one thing is certain. As free men, it is our right to live unencumbered and in peace. And those times are quickly drawing to an end. And in these times, peace is certainly an illusion. And as the chains grow tighter, our ability to slip those chains increase incrementally with every passing moment. Inaction is no longer an option. It's time to raise our voices like a cacophony of thunder and lightning and tell the masters no more. And this is Nighthawk, and I say, for myself, no more. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, because the freedom is slipping away.
Enjoy your extra big-ass fries.
You didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another extra big-ass fries?
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase. No. I'm sorry.
And welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio. I'm at freedomslips.com, and I'm your host, Janet Carol Lessin, with Dr. Sasha Lessin, and we're interviewing Frank Jacob and Tonia-Madenford. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com and make a donation. $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you donate will be greatly appreciated. And Thomas, man, do we have any specials?
No, ma'am, but we are asking people to actually donate to get Hawk and a camera crew out to the protests in Dakota with the pipeline. And if you want to do that, just put in the description box. It's for the protest out there against the pipeline.
Excellent. That's a good cause. Sash, you want to say something?
Oh, I just would like to say that it's really encouraging that our Native American friends have all come together, of all the tribes, to try to stop this atrocity to our land, the pipeline.
Yes, and all the people of all, whatever color, creed, nation, wherever you come from, all that are gathering to support this cause. Thank you for doing that. We can't all get there. All right, it's for the planet, it's for our whole world here. Back to you, Frank and Tonya. We're having a great time. We were talking about the Klaus Donner film. What else would you like to tell us about that film? And then we can go wherever you want to go.
I wanted to just expand on what Dr. Sasha Lessin had shared with us, and that was about our lineage as humanity. And now that we've had a chance to really explore the Klaus Donner Chronicles, that talks about the articles and artifacts that are coming forward and the civilizations that have been discovered and those that have been ongoing. With the film Solar Revolution, one of the recent features that we released, we get into what's happening with us on the planet and consciousness. And we get into the solar activity and what's happening to the planets within the cosmos, and how everything is being affected now and everything is shifting now, even the electromagnetic field on this planet. And I bring this up because of what Sasha has said, and that's about, our genetics, our DNA. And our DNA is largely made up of what's considered junk DNA, although it's not really junk at all. It was just classified as junk or titled as junk because we really didn't understand it. And science is still bringing forth new information. But when we get into this and we look at all the signs and all of the research with astrophysicists and physicists and biologists and chronobiologists and some of the information that we bring forward in our last film, Solar Revolution, we see that, in fact, every living human being on this planet is all in the same soup together collectively in what we call the electromagnetic field of the Earth. And we beat at the same biorhythm of the planet, and we are at the same frequency level, and we're not actually chemical bodies at all, even though the pharmaceutical companies would want to treat us that way. We're actually electrical. We are literally walking, talking, breathing antennas. And so when something happens in the cosmos, or something happens with the solar activity, or something happens within our universe, the electromagnetic field, we shift and we change. And just as we shift and we change, our DNA is shifting and changing. And this isn't about judgment. This isn't about, oh, did I meditate 20 minutes today? Although all of these things are wonderful modalities, it's important for us to have a spiritual base because this actually changes our perception. It basically gives us the glasses in which we view or perceive our reality. But in fact, this junk DNA or this pedigree DNA or this lineage that we've been gifted, as Dr. Sasha had stated prior to the break, is actually being activated right now. And there is great change happening on the planet at the moment and has been happening and will continue to happen. And I think this all goes back into our history that we've been talking about with Klaus Donner Chronicles, and talks about, where we're headed as a consciousness, as a collective consciousness, and as a race, and as a spacefaring civilization, which is our destiny on this planet.
Beautiful, well said.
I wanted to address the 256 strands of DNA that was intentionally shut off by the Anunnaki, especially probably Enki, Nema, and Nagashina, as they were doing the genetic experiments, because Enlil wanted us to be in non-existence. He wanted us destroyed. And so they dummied us down intentionally so we could continue to exist until the time is right. So here we have the yugas, and I did see Solar Revolution. I thought it was brilliant, and I'm going to pull that out and look at it again. But that apparently is kind of explaining what we might call the ascension process, where there's a point of the galactic alignment where we have a simultaneous DMT activation or something on that level, where we might all potentially become conscious at the same time, and then we'll stop playing these war games and demonization of each other. Go ahead, Frank.
For me, I held. I took particular interest in Dieter Burr's work because I look at it as very hopeful, because it seems like no matter how many generations or eons or millennia go by, we seem to continually be warring with each other, and we seem to have a certain consciousness process which we've been repeating, and this seems to be tied into perhaps what you described with, we've been, tied off, like our DNA have been limited deliberately for maybe some divine plan that it'll be unlocked in the future. And for me, having worked on Solar Revolution, was the hopeful thing was that it was going to be an involuntary activation, and that seems to be evidence. The evidence coming out in support of that is even being documented by NASA, so that this giant black hole at the center in Sagittarius A in space, which has essentially been blasting us with X-rays and plasma and radio waves, that this seems to be even what maybe perhaps the Hunab coup, as described by the Maya, is about, because they talked about a ray from the center of the galaxy coming here to actually, stimulate and influence consciousness. So this is in fact going on, and I think that we're seeing it kind of all around us. I mean, the 2012 window that came really is a window. It wasn't a date so much as it is a time period of activation that commenced in and around this time. We're in the middle of it right now, and we're seeing this evolution taking place all around us. We're seeing it in information downloads that are coming. We're seeing it in people that are having memories of things. And it's like there's this character in that series Fringe. They tried to delete him from the timeline.
Peter Bishop.
Yeah, and both both universes suddenly couldn't recall the guy, but he was so his vibration was so entrenched in the genetic memory that it failed. They could not erase him. And I think that this, if we've been, are you familiar with that character? If they've actually deleted. If they've actually deactivated our DNA, it's not going to work because it's there, and that genetic memory or that cellular memory of it in its full capacity will eventually leak back through and will be, what emerges as our true destiny.
In a morphogenic field.
Right. It's in there, and people feel it already. People feel it, and they can see it, and it's being documented.
Well, that's why we're not victims of that, intentional turning off our DNA. We can reactivate it through meditation. We're tantric practitioners. There's a way of having a Kundalini awakening, and that reconnects you with your full information, and all the way up to divine source is how we symbol it. So, what did you want to say, Sash?
Let Frank keep talking. I love what you're saying. Keep going, Frank. Keep talking.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, you can't. It just goes to show you that even any kind of efforts to try and stunt something, to dumb something down, it's never really. I mean, even the people who I think are behind doing something like this, they don't necessarily realize that they might be just a tool being used by some higher plan. To, like, if you try to suppress something, it'll reemerge. You can't keep the truth buried forever, because the truth will emerge. And this, will only make us stronger. So all these events that are used to keep us down, or things that are there to block us, from the simplest problem in your life that you solve up to, civilizational shifts. I think these things are all maybe pre-programmed for us to evolve and to eventually return to our fullest potential.
But the good news is...
I totally agree with you. Galzu, from the Federation, basically, according to Anunnaki material, told Anu, and Anu told his Earthling colony, listen, I can see we've been manipulated all along by events that are way beyond our control, and we're all part of a bigger plan. And so what we need to do is give humanities, the Earthlings, the Lulus, the information they need and the civilization they need up to a point, and as they're ready, give them more and more. And what Thoth and Nigashita said when he left, he was called Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl in the Mayan area. When he left, he said, I will come back December 21st, 2012 with other Nibiruns, and we will bring in the age, which is now the beginning of the age of Aquarius. Enki is in charge now. And Enki was one of our original, according to the Sumerians, creators who, with Nimma, his sister wife, and his son Ningishita, said, we're going to do better than we did on Nibiru. On Nibiru, we almost wiped ourselves out with a thermonuclear war. We're going to make these creatures who have erectus genes grafted in, so they're more compassionate. They are going to take over because they've got something we lack, which is compassion.
And that goes back, now I'll give it back to Tonya, but that goes back to what you said about the artifact of the pyramid, and the translation is the son of the creator comes. Mm-hmm. So the creator was Enki, and the son of Enki is Nigashita. So he was coming to South America. That might be one interpretation. Back to you, Tonya.
It's very interesting that Sasha talks about Quetzalcoatl, because Viracocha is also considered part of this. And the winged serpent is coming up a lot in crop circle depictions is the return of Viracocha or Quetzalcoatl. So it's a very interesting alignment indeed. And with Solar Revolution, it talks about, and we've done graphs with this. We worked with HeartMath and Roland McCready. They've done research in science, even the chronobiologist, Franz Halberg, along with the astrophysicists in Italy. And they've looked at all the solar activity, and you can literally see rises and falls of entire civilizations based on what's happening even with the sun. And as Frank had described, we have this massive plasma cloud that's entering into Sagittarius A right now that's sending particles our direction, and it's affecting all of the planets. We talk about global warming, the entire universe, our multiverse is heating. And the sun is shifting. And as we talk about involuntary evolution, literally the changes within the solar activity and the changes within our electromagnetic field are in turn changing what's happening to us. And our pineal gland is like the interface. You can consider it the spiritual interface. In a way, I guess if you liken it to the computer world, which has sort of become really like huge these days, especially with things like Man in the Sky or Pokemon, we really are living in this holographic reality, and the pineal gland is like the interface. And it's the interface to our spiritualism, if you can say that. And the DMT, when we're born into this reality, we want to call it a stargate, we come into this three-dimensional existence. We're swimming in DMT. We, as the child in the womb, are submersed into high levels of DMT. It's a natural state to be in flux of DMT. And Solar Revolution gets into this in terms of what's happening right now on the planet, what's happening with our DNA, and what's happening with our pineal gland, because it directly responds to this DMT that's in our system, that's naturally created. It happens in our dream state with the melatonin and serotonin levels and the DMT levels, and then we experience other realities and other worlds. And as Frank had just described, when we talk about other realities and other worlds, and Packing for Mars goes into this, but there's so much more. In fact, there's so many other films we could talk about. Parallel realities now are colliding. And there is so much research coming out, and even dark secret programs coming out with halon colliders and these parallel universes. We talk about the TV series Fringe. We talk about quantum, entanglement or quantum tunneling between universes. And the Mandela effect. I think we really have to get into this Mandela effect that's happening with people, because this reality, this pineal gland being the interface, our reality is shifting and it's changing. And Solar Revolution brings this to bout, and we take even people on this crazy spiritual DMT journey, what they might be experiencing in the coming time. We're already in that now. These parallel universes are overlapping. Already we are seeing a change in this quantum computing and this D-Wave device that they've now invented. We're already seeing a change in our timeline. Right now, if we go back even in this current timeline, we can see literal changes in even in the morphogenic field, or we could call it the acacia. We have certain memories, and now our reality is now different. I know Frank could expand on this as well, because we've been doing a lot of research on this lately about quantum tunneling, quantum bridging, and parallel universes colliding.
Well, it has to do with a lot of the technology which is being developed by this breakaway civilization we talk about in Packing for Mars. And they've really been mining into some new areas, which are, of course, causing things to happen. They're causing changes to our particular universe, to our particular dimension. And we're interested in knowing, why are they doing this, what's behind it, of course. And that's some of the thing that we, the idea of a breakaway civilization which is setting up a survival colony on another planet, which is one of the three alternatives discussed in the premise of behind the film, the book Alternative 3, was that essentially humanity was, at least at the time that the book was written in the 70s, the big thing was global warming, climate change, and pollution and overpopulation, and the people who were holding the think tanks were saying to themselves, there's no way we can reverse it. Humanity's doomed. We have to do something about it. We have to save at least some of the human species. And that became the impetus for them to go off-world, first to the moon and then to Mars, of course. So this concept is what it interests us, because, what are the signs of something going on that's happening, and who's behind it? And it's clear that starting at least at the time of the Roswell crash in 1947, when they began reverse engineering the technology, and perhaps going back, obviously earlier, we have all kinds of interesting accounts of the German military, the Nazis in the 30s already having been contacted by a supposed extraterrestrial race of Tals that told them about specific locations on the planet where they could go, including Antarctica, and also sharing technology to give them certain technological superiority, there seems to be some like branch of like some own kind of caste of civilization which is privy to information the rest of us aren't, and they seem to be using that information to gain advantage and to set up their own little Elysium. And maybe it's in different parts of the universe. We explore it in terms of the Mars concept, but there's also evidence, as we're seeing from Corey Good's disclosures and Randy Kramer, that this breakaway civilization seems to be having spread all throughout the solar system.
Yeah, I'd like to dovetail on some of these things. First of all, utterly brilliant to look at the pineal as our modems that make what's coming in translatable to us. That's absolutely wonderful. And as far as DMT, it just sounds like dimethyltryptamine. What we're in terms of everyday language, you can get a DMT in ayahuasca, which is a combination of Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridis. It's a legal substance that American Indians are allowed to take. And I would say also about what you were saying, Frank, that there's a lot of evidence of that the Germans, way before Byrd ever lost the Battle of Antarctica in 1947, had already started an initial settlement on the surface of Mars. Then they went underground, and that they were there, and that it's this third, they call it the Fourth Reich, the paperclip Nazis that took over our government and our corporations, also took over running the slave colonies of abducted Earthlings on Mars. And so I just thought I'd put those
no, that's a good point, because that you just hit on one of the key topics in the book version of Alternative 3, which the show really didn't get into, and that is this, what Leslie called batch consignments. And there was really, literally, there's hundreds of thousands of people were disappearing without a trace. And they didn't know where they were ending up. But in the book, they were ending up as part of. First of all, they were being mind controlled. Their brains were lobotomized in a sense, and they became perfect, robots for their labor requirements on the new colony off-world. And it's interesting because there really are millions of cases of missing people around the world every year. Now, many of them you could say are probably people who either want to disappear, and a large amount of them, are ending up in, explainable or, violent crimes or whatever else. But there are certainly, you can't write them all off that way. I mean, we were in Nexus in Australia, and there was an American author there. What was his name again? He was writing about the disappearance of people in parks, national parks. They would go in, and they would, even people that were together with groups of 2 or 3 or 4 people, they would sometimes, one of the persons would just say, hey, I'm going to go over, I just forgot something back at the tent. They would make a turn, go back, and then their friends would never see them again. And if they brought in scent dogs to find out where they disappeared to try and pick up the trail, these people would just, the dogs would follow them to a certain point where the trail just ended, and it would end. There was no other, they would just they vanished into thin air. There was no other people that came and met them. There were no other scents picked up anywhere. And there's literally thousands of cases of this going on. So it just seems to be very uncanny that this could be, that it was actually documented in Alternative 3, the book. And then later, of course, there's the Total Recall, that film with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is, of course, also depicts this, idea that there was a slave race on the surface of Mars, which is being used by the power broker elites to do all of their muscle and grunt work. So it's a very interesting concept, I got to say, and we definitely can see that the idea that a group of people that would gain access to technology that the rest of the people in the population never get access to, and develop this with massive amounts of money, with really trillions of dollars, as Bill Ryan describes in our film, for many, many decades would, of course, get somewhere in the private sector the rest of us will never hear about. So the technology that they're working with makes, like if we were, it's like comparing us going back in time 200 years with an iPhone and doing video recordings of some people in New York City. They would just think you're obviously from some other planet because the technology just is unfathomable. But the problem is, it really isn't that complex if you just follow into the future. However, I think that the technology, this breakaway civilization, is working. Their iPhones are like the time machines, teleporters, and quantum tunnels that they're developing for themselves.
Just as Frank had described when we were at Nexus, we had a booth area when we were doing a screening with Packing for Mars, and right next to us, the author's name is David Politis, and all the books, if you want to research them, is called Missing 411. He's done extensive amounts of research in national parks, and it's very interesting with all of these missing people. The park rangers, the security officers, the police department, for whatever reason, I don't know, they don't track these missing people. And what's also interesting, even from a metaphysical standpoint, is a large majority of these missing people in these national parks, and it's happening around the world, and there's massive cases, are happening near large areas of granite rock, which I find very interesting. If you think about our national parks, a majority of them have granite rock. Granite is a crystallized formation rock, and I think has everything to do with time anomalies, time shifting, things that we discuss even in the film. It's obviously an energy carrier. Granite or crystalline structure actually carries a certain frequency. And they've had really strange, if you get into the missing 411 cases, they've had really strange anomalies and testimonies and documented cases where people will go missing and reappear days later with missing time, sometimes miles off the spot where they went missing. And a large majority of them, even. Yeah, and a large majority of them went missing when they were with groups. It wasn't like they were like on their own, out in the park alone. No, they were walking with a group. They might have been trailing behind, and poof, they're gone. And wow. It's very interesting to dive into these cases. Now, I personally have my own thought in this, and I haven't dove completely into all of David Politis' research. Obviously, he's a case documenter, a research documenter, and all of what's happening. And I find it very peculiar that, rangers and state parks, BLM, Forest Service, and all these park officials are not tracking all of these missing cases. For some reason, there's a block, or they've been told not to track these cases because it's security, it breaches in national security. I don't know. And I don't want to hypothesize, but I do think, given the nature of many of these cases and the work we've done in Ultimate Rush, a lot of these wingsuit flyers and highline walkers, we've done 30 shows in some of the most extreme sports you can imagine in Red Bull, and these guys will crawl around and go to, and a lot of these places they go to are national parks because it's pristine areas. It's not a lot of public traffic. It's extreme areas where they can climb to top cliffs or rock climbing locations or cliff diving locations, highlining locations, or wingsuit jump spots where they can literally explore their sport. And it's very interesting with all of the things that are happening, and we tie it back to Packing for Mars in that a lot of these cases, being that there's granite rock, and being that there are some of these cases where they end up, in some cases, dead, or they end up reappearing at a different location, maybe injured, or many times they have no clothing, indicates there's some sort of time anomaly happening. It very could be that 50% of these missing people are going to reappear in another area in time. Maybe they haven't disappeared; they just disappeared from our reality. And this is all a probable thing when you get into parallel universes and you get into the crazy subjects of Packing for Mars and time travel and teleportation. You have to look at all of this as a whole.
Well, I wanted to add 2 cents to this. First of all, Peter Moon and Stuart Swerdlow talk about during the Montauk Project, over 100,000 people were used in their project, and they disappeared. And most of them did not return. When I was in Honolulu in 1993, J.J. Hartog came to town, and he did a presentation, and this woman stood up at the end of it, and she said, "My husband's on Mars. They took him to the Mars colony. Will someone please help me?" And nobody, they thought he was a kook, and I went over and talked to her. And I just listened to her story, and I totally believed her and empathized with her. And so I just want to go back to when I was a 4-year-old, I was taken on board a mothership. I am an experiencer. And when I was on the mothership, I was my eternal self. I had awareness of who I was in the continuum. I wasn't just a 4-year-old. They showed me 24 different multiverses, 12 of which were positive and 12 of which were negative. And I had a show later with Tolik, and he said, "Oh yeah, they showed me also the 24 multiverses and the potentials of the human condition and where we can go as the observer participant traveling down these timelines. We are capable of shifting lanes and selecting which reality we want to experience." So that's why I caution people, be careful what you think, because your thoughts are deeds, and you are creating that reality that you may or may not want. Okay, so that's going back to the DMT and the parallel reality. Sasha wants to say something.
Just my colleague, who's also on this radio station, Monique Lasson, has said there may be something way more nefarious, not just slaves in the taking of people in national parks, but why the rangers and cops are covering up, and that the government itself takes many people, some for slaves, some for sexual objects, some for programming, and that the government, the clandestine part of our government, is part of this vast murder and kidnapping that's going on.
And that Andrew Bashaga thought a part of them might be Bigfoot, because when he was 8 years old, he encountered Bigfoot in one of the national parks. Anyway, back to you guys.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there is, who's really like the government is a good question. There's the elected officials, and then you have to ask yourself, the decisions that are being made just don't seem to add up, and a lot of stuff doesn't add up. And I think one thing that I realized in making a film like Packing for Mars, when I started it originally, before I even met Tanya, was that it was like I made a decision for myself to kind of draw a line. Do I open myself up to exploring this alternative version of reality, or do I stay locked into the herd mentality that most people, for lack of a better word, are in because they want to stay safe? They want to be inside their box. We have Richard Dolan talking a lot about that in the film, about how people are into this. They're into this box. They've grown up. They're part of the system. They get up in the morning, they make breakfast, they go to work, they come home, and they watch TV and they repeat. But they never really look outside of the box, because all that stuff that they had when they were kids that they were exploring, all these crazy, wacky ideas that they could because they weren't adults yet, they've put that all behind them. So, I mean, everyone, I think, has to kind of make that decision now. It's becoming very clear what, when you draw that line, do you open yourself up to? Do you stay safe and risk the ridicule of your colleagues, or risk the ridicule of your friends and family because you're open to the idea of extraterrestrials or conspiracies, let's say? The whole idea of conspiracy theory is what's the word for that? It's just you're pigeonholed when you're a conspiracy theorist. Yeah. But if you look at the people who were putting together the 9/11 report, when the World Trade Center went down, if anyone is involved in a conspiracy theory, I would say it's those people, because in the face of all the evidence of what really could have happened physically, they're definitely conspiracy theorists.
But what's very interesting is, like Dolan said in the film, he talks about the people that go out, they're working a 9-to-5 job, they come home, and even these people need the truth. And it's interesting, this new effect that's coming on. I know we touched upon it. We haven't had a lot of time to get into it, and this is one of the subjects of the film, is time travel and teleportation. A lot of people know about the Hadron Collider in CERN in Switzerland, but there are actually over 14 Hadron Colliders on the planet, maybe even more that we're not even aware of. There was a project called the Chani Project that Duncan Rhodes, when we were at Nexus, brought us in alignment with and actually shared some interesting data with us. It was about a computer interface communication with an entity. And it was an underground hadron facility in Africa. They actually had a dialogue in the early 90s over the course of 5 years with an entity. They were able to actually ask over 200 questions and have an exchange with this entity. And the reason I bring this up is right now, the everyday normal person that goes out working the 9-to-5 job, partying the weekends, that isn't into all this conspiracy thing, that aren't particularly awake or just trying to get by in the typical Matrix program, are starting to see something weird. And that weirdness is this Mandela effect. And I don't know if the both of you are aware of what's happening. It's slowly...
Well, go ahead and describe it for our listeners.
Well,
go, because I had an episode of that, but go ahead. Tell our listeners
what's
what
happening.
it is.
I mean, I have my own experiences, but what's happening is very interesting. And I'm in the movie field. So my background is Hollywood. I know mainstream Hollywood. And many things in our what we would consider the morphogenic field or the Akashic record or our memory or our collective memory is movies. And what's happening is the normal Joe Blow out there on the street that works 9-to-5 jobs, parties on the weekends, not very awake, is going, something's weird here. Something's not right. And weird things are starting to change in our timeline, like really bizarre things, like logos on cars, or like the way branding of cereals were, like Fruit Loops and other things that we just took for granted that we weren't really paying attention. All of a sudden, name changes, apostrophe, and things like Lowe's hardware store, like very bizarre things, subtle changes that we have never actually stopped to think about. Lines in movies, like with Star Wars, or like movies that we always knew, like Silence of the Lambs, or particular scenes in Forrest Gump, where lines that we knew were there are now changing in the morphogenic field. And I mean changing, like lines that we absolutely knew were certain ways. The people that have seen like Star Wars 200 times remember exactly what Darth Vader said to his son Luke. And all of a sudden, now, if you go back to your DVD that you had archived or your VHS tapes that you had archived and you pull that off the dusty shelf and you stick it in the player, what you saw 20 years ago or 10 years ago is not what you're going to see today. It means that everything is changing in the timeline from our videos, our movies, our photographs, and the only thing remaining is our memory.
It's our memory. I mean, the whole Mandela effect comes from the term Nelson Mandela, and it started when, I think it was, actually I was recently told that Art Bell was one of the initial people to make that observation, that somebody told him that they had heard that Nelson Mandela had died in the 80s in prison. And other people and have a clear memory of him having died in prison in the 80s, whereas a whole other faction of society recalls that he just recently passed away. And that's why that was sort of the early beginnings of it, and people began to wonder, wait a minute, how could history be different for so many people?
One of the primary examples is this. I mean, this is like the layman test of all tests. I mean, I knew Star Wars. I'm a movie maker, right? So C-3PO. Most people remember C-3PO and R2-D2. This is one of the parts of original Star Wars. I remember C-3PO as being all gold. Wasn't C-3PO all gold? I remember him as all gold. Apparently now, in the morphogenic field, in our new reality, if you go back into old clips and old film, and you now try to go back and view your films, C-3PO had a silver leg. I don't remember a silver leg. I've seen that movie 100 times. C-3PO wasn't silver. He didn't have a silver leg. He was all gold.
It doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't even make sense. Another example is Silence of the Lambs. I remember Anthony Hopkins in this movie. Oh my gosh. I remember Jodie Foster. Like, the movie Contact was all about looking glass technology. Jodie Foster was huge for me back in the days. So she does a movie, Silence of the Lambs, with Anthony Hopkins. She goes down and she meets Anthony Hopkins for the first time. I'll never forget the scene. It gave me chills. The arms, the hair on my arms just stood. She goes down and she meets this Hannibal Lecter, I think his name was in the film. And one of the first lines Anthony Hopkins says to Jodie Foster is, he says, "Hello, Clarice." That freaked me out because Hannibal Lecter knew who this chick was. My hair stood up. I'm like, oh my God, how does this guy know her name? He's in prison. She's visiting for the first time. He knows who she is. And it freaked me out. That Hello, Clarice is not in the movie anymore. Mm-hmm. It's gone.
Oh my God.
And the movie Life is Like a Box of Chocolates.
Yeah.
Is another example. There's weird things, logos on cars and logos. I mean, you can search the YouTube and look up Mandela effect. It's happening to the layman, normal person on the street. And part of this is due to this D-wave machine. It's not just the Hadron Colliders. It's not just this in CERN they claim it's the search for the God particle, but really what this is Stargate technology. But the D-wave machine that they've done, where this quantum computing chip, no larger than the size of a thumbnail, they've actually recreated a refrigeration system like deep space. And they have this D-wave machine now that seriously...
It's colder than deep space.
It's colder than deep space. And what it's doing is it's altering our timeline. And so start paying attention.
They're using quantum computers to solve problems between universes. And I mean, it just alone that sounds like it's right out of a science fiction movie, but it's really going on.
It's changing our timeline.
And it's changing things.
Changing our field. Start paying attention. And it's a subtle thing.
So when I was on the ship, and then I'll give it to you, Sash, when I was up in the ship when I was 4 years old, they'd show me the timelines, and they said, we're going to return you to the timeline where your very first movie you will see is Hercules Unchained. They said, we took you, and the first movie you would have seen was Hercules. So they said, remember that. So they told me when I was 4 years old to remember this variation, because that's an indicator that you're on a different timeline. So if what's happening with your movie, and we are aligning with the core and all this stuff is coming out here, we are shifting into a timeline, a different timeline. So where are we going? Is it individual? Is it collective? Are we going into a better timeline or a worse timeline? So that's just, what did you want to say, Sash?
Oh, it just, Joanna Macy talks about the Hawking's energy, which as energy goes out of the black hole, which we can measure, it's also going inward too, so that as the alignment happens, everything changes, all our dimensions change, and there's energy that our advanced scientists are probably well aware of, and they're just keeping that a secret from us.
Yes, well, I think a lot of them, of course, keep their secrets less as maybe a conspiracy and more as they're just, as always, very reluctant to draw conclusions about something, or they're just waiting until they can figure out some way to turn it into a financial advantage for themselves through getting grants or securing, funding from investors. Yeah, I mean, the breakaway civilization that is dealing with these technologies, I'm sure is well aware of all of this, if they're not, in fact, causing or having direct participation in it. And you do have to ask yourself, like, what is it that they know that the rest of us don't know, and why have they set up these bases on Mars and on the Moon, and who are they working together with, and the rest of us, I think, that are left here on the Earth, there's a lot of people that make a joke about the breakaway civilization taking off to Mars. They're like, yeah, let them go. Let's get rid of them. We don't want them around here. The elite have created nothing but problems for the rest of us. That might be the case, but I think we, no matter what that scenario is, have to embrace our full potential, and we have to make a shift. We need to make a shift in our consciousness for very, very important reasons, because we cannot continue the thought processes which have led us to this point. That there's that there's that saying that, you can't solve, it's Einstein that says you can't solve the problems with the same way of thinking that created them in the first place. So we're standing an evolutionary leap in consciousness right now, where we do need to make that leap in consciousness, or we're going to be the ones that are going to be left in the dust while the so-called breakaway civilization is moving past us, and we have to prevent that. It's up to us to pull together and make that recognition to become awakened citizens of a greater universe.
And it's really beautiful what Laura shared in the Packing for Mars film, and that she talks about it's not about leaving this planet and trying to colonize another planet. It's about accepting and understanding the beautiful planet that we're on. I think we as a human civilization are destined to be a spacefaring civilization. The Earth is a womb planet. It's a womb planet to many star civilizations, even before humanity and the new, let's say, yes, Earth man. However, we need to embrace the beautiful planet that we're on, and it's not about colonizing someplace else and creating the same problems there that we have here, rather than solving the issues that we have here. For your listeners, if they want to research the Chani project, it's CHANI project, and Nexus did a wonderful article. It's like a 10-page article in their magazine about this computer interface communication with this entity. This parallel reality is like a mirror world of ours, and they're higher in frequency vibration is our universe, and they talk about a collision between these two universes. And within this other universe, it's very interesting because this entity asked, like I said before, over 200 questions we asked, and we had exchanges with this entity about our reality. And one of the things that came up, since Packing for Mars goes into the moon bases and the Mars bases, and I've done several films on the moon as well, is this entity says that actually the moon is artificial. And if the moon wasn't there, in fact, we would be a very peaceful, harmonious world. And that's interesting. That means that there is a lot of other forces or civilizations or other
well, I think essentially
affecting our reality.
There is that whole object of the moon is another subject altogether, but I think getting to the point of essentially waking up and embracing whatever this collision is that's happening, this consciousness evolution, whether it's involuntary or whether it's being induced from whatever the source is. Part of it is becoming aware of the illusions, and it's becoming aware of the deception. And the thing is, with people like, once, when we had Packing for Mars screening at the EBE Festival, we were approached by, Dr. Ken Johnson, and he was verifying. He's a civilian astronaut who was involved in training the astronauts of the Apollo program, and he later became the archivist for the photographic evidence from those missions. And he had with him pictures that verified dark side of the moon colonies, bases, that were very clearly seen, that were mirrored, of course, in our film and from the work of Jose Escamilla about the smudging of objects on the surface of planets such as the moon and such as Mars. And this is all part of breaking through the illusion. We're living in a time right now where we really do need to make that decision to look at things a little bit more skeptically and maybe question things that we've been taking for granted for a long time. And part of that is, of course, just seeing things for what they really are, being not afraid to make those ventures into this sort of dangerous territory of shattering your normal reality of every day. Wouldn't you say?
I think that's great. One of the interesting things in science is called the null hypothesis, that is what it would take to disprove it. And so one of the interesting ways to look at whatever a government spokesman says is, what's the opposite of what he says? What is the null hypothesis of this? What is, since this is an official pronouncement, what is it covering up or shunting from vision by this particular event and this particular announcement? Don't trust the government.
Totally.
I wanted to ask about if the moon is artificial, why would the moon make us not a peaceful planet, harmonious world? What is it about the moon that's upsetting our world and making it violent?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what it is about the moon, what quality the moon has, but it just seemed very interesting that this entity which communicated through this Hadron Collider experiment that took place in the 90s, this Chani project, was saying that he was surprised. They were able to ask questions both ways, and they asked us, why have you still got the moon? We got rid of that a long time ago.
They destroyed their moon.
And once we got rid of it, we noticed that our civilization became much more peaceful, much more harmonious. So the moon apparently seems to have this effect on us to create these imbalances, to create this.
We're told by science that we need the moon for tides and certain alignments and physical elements that happen on this planet. But in fact, this Chani experiment, this Chani project, the entity was just perplexed as to why we still allowed the moon to be there, that they had removed the moon from their reality a long time ago, and that it actually had changed their reality, and that in fact it was an artificial structure that was put in our orbit to control some element within our, let's say, hologram or matrix reality that we exist in.
Sure, well, and if you look at the gravitational effect of it, I mean, it's clear the moon has this gravitational effect, and it's a very unusually large body to be that close to our planet, which makes you wonder whether it really is a solid body or not. But if we are, as we learned in Solar Revolution, we're electromagnetic fields, and we are affected by gravitational influences from the magnetic field all around the planet. We harmonize with the Schumann frequencies around the planet. And so the moon has a very significant impact on us psychically, absolutely. It's just that we don't really measure it or acknowledge it with our current scientific approaches.
I did a movie with Jose Escamilla, who's one of the presenters in Pact from Mars. You were going to say something, Janet.
Yes, are you familiar with Spencer's Alien Interview? And he talks about, with Errol the Grey, that the moon, that they were trying to figure out why this planet is a prison planet, and they even tried to free their souls. But then we had another person we were interviewing, and he said that the moon is where they harvest the souls, and souls go back through, and they end up coming back into this this cycle where they have to be born back into the earth, and they can't get out of the cycle of reincarnation. So perhaps the other species got rid of their moon, and they're free of this belief that we have to incarnate and go through karma and go through all this life, death, birth, rebirth, and then they become physically immortal and don't have to go through the cycles. That's why I was just getting real clear when you were saying that why did they destroy the moon? Because the moon is keeping us into this prison cycle.
Interesting, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think the idea that we are at this cusp of evolution, on the one hand, is, for me, I had this recent thought that people say, well, the advanced species, they're telepathic, they don't need to use words to communicate, they can read each other's minds, and then I just had this realization that, okay, that's cool, that sounds great and everything, but in a way, it's kind of a daunting thought that the idea of privacy would almost vanish, because anything you think or project from yourself can be read by others. And one of the things that you could say we as human beings have, that is a very maybe precious thing, is that we have this absolute isolation. The negative side of it is we feel isolated, we feel alone, that we feel abandoned in the universe, and we don't know our place in it. But the positive side is we get to explore this idea of complete isolation and seclusion. We get to develop the strength of character in us that feels that, through the idea of feeling separate, has to rely on certain states of consciousness to get ourselves through difficult situations. And this might be something which a lot of the other races that are out there do not have. This idea of individualism, that we actually have, our own cosmos within ourselves, locked off and separated from being viewed and analyzed by others around us.
That's exactly what the concept in the Gaia project by a Korean fellow, and I can't remember his name. He said that we are in a skin-encapsulated self sense. Our skin is very thick, so it's not permeable. We don't feel the apparent other. So that separation allows us to not feel the other person, to feel separate, to maximize diversity. And so part of the maximization of diversification is this war, good, evil, light, dark, and this war paradigm. So while war is bad, we have created a tremendous amount of technologies and other things, and we've grown spiritually by having that conflict. But now we've maximized this, and we are devolving rather than evolving, and it's time to have disclosure to end this perverted game and go into a higher level, which is the DMT activation that you talked about in the solar.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I mean, that's it. That's the key point right there that we talked about earlier. It's just that all these things may not all be negative. The whole idea of negativities may only just be part of a greater plan for us to understand the yin and yang, the positive, negative, the polarities of the universe that are seemingly everywhere. It seems like clear that we can't just exist in a simply a positive universe, because even in that film The Matrix, they talk about how they created a matrix where everything was great, and it failed because people need conflict. They need to have some kind of stimulus, which is causing them to have to reach inside and develop resources to cope with it, and that's what makes us stronger.
So now that they're looking at the other universe is bleeding through into us. Do they have the same operating system of polarity like dark, good, evil, or do they have another operating system to maximize their existence? Did they ask that question?
What's very interesting is what's been told either through the Chani Project and through other sources, even through this G-Wave, because they're literally doing quantum tunneling. They're tunneling through parallel universes right now. The one that's approaching us very quickly, and I want to get into Giuliana Conforto's research really briefly before the show ends, but back to the parallel universes, they say that this other universe that is colliding with ours and is approaching very quickly, and it's already, in a sense, already overlapping, hence the Mandela effect, is actually a higher frequency universe or parallel universe than ours. So that means that it's like a mirror or a parallel universe to ours that's overlapping ours, and you can look at it as like a collision, an overlap, and a continuation. So when we talk about change, even with regards to solar revolution, this is all part of it. You have literally an overlapping of dimensions. This parallel universe that's colliding with ours, you could look at it like a timeline on train tracks, and we have a converging of train tracks happening, although this parallel universe is apparently in higher frequency as ours. If you even watch the show Fringe, the TV series Fringe, it's so amazing. This is like scientific research, in my opinion, because they bring up.
It was wonderful.
Oh, it's fantastic. And it talks all about these parallel colliding universes and the symptoms of this in the eye of the storm and what happens. But one of the interesting shows talks about not only these two realities and how the realities compare to one another, how they need to collaborate with one another, and how they coexist together, but also how we resonate at the same frequency as our own universe. And this is true with our astronauts. We get into this with Packing for Mars because we talk about the Apollo 19 and 20 missions and what astronauts experience.
Oh my goodness, we're out of time. We're going to have to do more.
We're going to have to get you back.
What? That was 2 hours. What? Thank you so much, Tonya and Frank. We will have you back. Much love and blessings. Go ahead, honey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aloha.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern in Studio A. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.